Hello, friends. This is Jim with Science Talk, and have something I want to discuss with you involving the ancestors of wild plants. Basically, it has to do with that everything that humans eat or drink comes directly or indirectly from plants. Right? You know that photosynthesis. If we eat a crop that is grown like corn or wheat directly, or that feeds animals that we then eat. All life depends on productivity of plants, which ultimately, at least on the surface, is sunlight energy. We're not going to talk about the chemosynthetic ecosystems found at the bottom of the oceans and so on. That's a different thing. That's a different topic, different discussion. So many wild plant ancestors of even the most important species for humans could be at risk. Only a small percentage of wild plant ancestors vital to human life can be considered safe from extinction. Botanists who have monitored the conservation status of almost 7,000 species, the wild forerunners of plants that humans use for food, medicine, shelter, food, and livestock feed, found that most could be counted as not properly conserved and protected. All the world's most important crops are selected, bred, and cultivated from wild ancestors. These original forerunners remain a significant reservoir of genes that could be important to a species' survival. But when researchers came to measure progress in global conservation goals, they found that only 3 species in 100 could be counted as sufficiently conserved. 3 in 100. So that's 30 in 1,000. Okay, and there's 7,000, so it's only 210 species out of 7,000. 3%, right? Many of these wild originals are of global commercial importance. These include the wild relatives of billion-dollar crops such as coffee, chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon, and others, and not to mention food crops as well. Colin Currie, who is a specialist in biodiversity at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture in Colombia, and his colleagues, report in the journal Ecological Indicators that they drew on some of the 43 million records of 6,941 plants of socioeconomic importance or cultural value. In effect, plants that make money for people. And this is from across 220 countries. The scientists devised a useful plants indicator, which sorted wild crop ancestors into their status as conserved species in national parks or protected forests and as specimens in gene banks, botanical gardens, etc. Now, lots of times scientists will use indicators and to assign a value for whatever it is they're measuring. Typically, these indicators are unitless, so it's not like meters per second or grams per cubic centimeter, nothing like that. It's just a number. I mean, some of the research I have done, I calculate what's called an index of relative importance when I was looking at the importance of prey taxa to the diet of salmon fry. It's a number. The higher the number, the more important that particular taxa is to the fry, as an example. So indicators are things that scientists typically develop, and sort of a way to put a rough quantitative measure on things. So one of the things they looked at was, as just mentioned, was coffee, and it turned out coffee is in danger, is in peril. They found that the wild coffee plants, Coffea liberica and Coffea arabica, basically Arabian coffee, were far from safe, and 32 other coffee species were also rated as nowhere near sufficiently protected. 2/3 of the coffee species were not recorded in gene banks at all. Now, for those of you who drink coffee, I guess this would be alarming news. I am not a coffee drinker, so be that as it may. But coffee is a crop sensitive to temperature. And as temperature globally continue to increase, coffee producers in both Ethiopia and Latin America face an uncertain economic future. And of course, that means that the coffee ability to harvest and cultivate the required tonnage of coffee is in jeopardy. Much the same was true for Theobroma coca, which is the wild ancestor of the chocolate of the tropical Americas, the flavoring bean Vanilla planifolia, and the wild spice cinnamon or Cinnamomum vera. Okay, so these are other plants that are in danger of seeing a fall off in their production, and which will then have economic impacts, adverse ones, for those who grow them. So, like everything else, as we've seen with climate change, species may have to shift their range or into landscapes at hazard from ecosystem disruption. In other words, they need to shift into areas that would be more conducive for how they grow. Some of these areas that may have the physical parameters necessary for their well-being may turn out to be ecosystems that are in a state of disruption, so that presents another hazard to try and keep these plants going. So in other words, as we are warming the planet, we are not just warming the planet, but we are changing the ecosystem. We are changing the conditions by which plants can be grown, and by extension, livestock can be raised. So this, and I've done stories before talking about how increasing temperature is affecting crop yield and crop nutritional value. Here's kind of this one is looking at the economic issue, but it's the same thing. It's going to affect crop yield, okay? And we are changing, we are basically being detrimental to our food supply. Our activity is placing in jeopardy our food supply. So, a quick little word about truffles. The truffle species Tuber melanosporum, which is trading at more than 1,000 pounds, about $1,300 US per kilogram, could be lost to commerce within 1 or 2 generations. This is from a new study in the journal Science of the Total Environment. So this report finds that under the most likely global warming scenarios, the climate of its native habitat will become warmer and drier. Truffles are basically fungus, and fungus like damp and moisture. And production of the wild and farm species could dwindle by between 78 and 100% in the third quarter of this, or the last quarter of this century. Paul Thomas of the University of Stirling, basically is an author of this and a researcher of the study, has already tested black truffle plantations in Scotland, studied 36 years of truffle harvest records to reach his conclusion. He warns that the collapse of the truffle harvest could happen even earlier due to heat waves, forest fires, droughts, pests, diseases that come with changing the climate. Europe risks losing an industry worth hundreds of millions along with an iconic species and a regional way of life. This is a wake-up call to the impacts of climate change in the not-too-distant future, Dr. Thomas said. These findings indicate that conservational initiatives are required to form some protection of this important and iconic species. That he concludes there. We can take his comments and extend it to all plant species that humans rely on, as well as plant species in general, preserve ecosystems, so on. But if we want to protect crops that we depend on to live and for our medicine, we have to start taking steps. So that's basically what this article was about, and or these two articles. And as other stories have done, we are jeopardizing our food supplies, what it comes down to. So here's another study along those strings of studies I've shared with you that everyone thinks, oh, warmer temperatures, we can grow more food. Well, no, not really, because temperatures have, plant species have preferred temperature ranges. Outside of those temperature ranges, they do not do well, or as well. And it's not only temperature, but it's moisture conditions. How wet, moist, dry, whatever are the conditions, because plants have requirements. And requirements are temperature, moisture levels, as well as chemical species requirement. All of this is changing. We're putting all our food supply in jeopardy. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon. Hey folks, this is Jim here reminding you to subscribe to this channel, to share my videos, tell others of the work that I do here. I also ask that if you are not already a patron at Patreon, to please consider becoming a patron at Patreon. You can find the information in the description box below the video. I'm asking you to help support the work that I do. I do not take any money from corporations or from any other sources, so the information I share with you is the actual science as it comes out of the peer-reviewed journals. So there is no BS, there's no propaganda, there's no agenda. It's just I present the science and I explain to you what it means, or at least my interpretations of it, based on my own experience as a scientist. I want this channel to grow. I consider, while I discuss many different topics here, you notice I do focus a lot on climate issues. I consider climate change to be the most pressing issue facing humanity today. Thus, I consider it important to disseminate this information to a wider and wider, more and more people. And I need your help to do this. So, yes, please subscribe. Please tell others of the work that I do here. Please share my videos on social media platforms, with your social media groups, what have you. We need to get this information out there. So for those of you who are supporting me on Patreon, I thank you greatly for your support and continued support. It does mean a lot to me. So together we can get this information to more and more people. Thank you. Thank you for your support.